Alrighty. So today our learning objectives is as we're talking about like this whole, we're basically going to try to track a nutrient from start to finish, physiologically, like what's happening to that food. How does food become energy? That's what we're looking at today. So what happens to nutrients after they're absorbed? How do carbohydrates get digested? How do fats get digested? How do proteins get digested? Minerals and vitamins, how do they interact inside the body? And how are they like transported? The idea of energy and energy production, and how our cells make ATP and what our different metabolic pathways are. So we do kind of want to tie this idea of like food to the right, energetic pathways, right? So nutrients, I love this. I love that they kind of open up with this, because I always try to like drive this point home to people as well. But it's like nutrients are said to be outside the body until they are absorbed across the membrane of the digestive tract into the bloodstream, right? So again, human donut, right? Like food's going through the center hole of a donut, but then it gets absorbed into the body. That's what happens to our food, right? It goes through this tube of outside that runs through our inside, and is just sort of exposed to all of these like gastric juices and enzymes and all these materials that help us break stuff down. And then it gets so freaking small that it's able to straight up pass into like our actual bloodstream and stuff. We would be able to, you think about like, if there was like, if there are other digestive tracts out there, and there are, like some creatures, they're able to just kind of like passively grab something and let those nutrients get, just kind of pass straight into their bloodstream, right? We're not able to do that. We have to have this really complicated system that kind of breaks things down in order for it to get small enough. So once it's absorbed, it's going to be transported through our blood and our lymph. Lymph is basically just like fluid running throughout your body, in order to be able to transport things and get those nutrients where they need to go so that we can metabolize stuff. So when we're talking about this process of digestion, what we really mean is that we're basically breaking down foods into their basic components, right? Carbohydrates become sugars, proteins become amino acids, fats become lipids, vitamins and minerals, they get to kind of, they're already kind of broken down. They get to kind of be their own thing. And then once that happens, all of those things can enter the body, right? All of that is going to be carried mostly by water, although, fat and fat soluble vitamins are going to be carried kind of by themselves. And then that's going to get into our bloodstream. And then once it's in our bloodstream, it can do all the stuff, right? So really quickly, I got a good one for you here. Nutrition. And we want this one. This is I gotta make sure I don't show the wrong video.
What's
here.
It like to learn?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the wrong one. That's the one we watched last time. That's the one I want, the one with the nasty sandwich. Okay, we're gonna watch Hank eat the world's grossest sandwich. So here we go.
Hello, and welcome to the kitchen. I wanted to invite you here today because last week we started off in my bathroom, and I kind of feel bad about that. And also because as I'm making lunch today, I wanted to, sort of use it as a lab. During this time in my kitchen, I'm going to talk to you about 3 different things. 1, the 3 most important molecules on the earth. 2, possibly the grossest sandwich I'm ever going to eat. And 3, an obscure scientist who taught us everything that we know about urine. So far we've talked about carbon and we've talked about water, and now we're going to talk about the molecules that make up every living thing, and every living thing in every living thing. I don't care if you're a bacterium, or if you're a blue whale, or if you're Lady Gaga, or if you're a mite living on the Queen of England's eyelashes. They're called biological molecules. These aren't just building blocks. These are the molecules necessary for every living thing on Earth to survive. They are essential sources of energy. They are the means of storing that energy. They are also the instructions that all organisms use to be born, to grow, and ultimately pass those same instructions on to their future generation. They are the ingredients for life. And we call them the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, and the nucleic acids. And today we're just going to be talking about the first three. It's no coincidence that we classify them in the same way that we classify food, because they're food. And for this classification, we have to thank a little-known English physician who, hundreds of years ago, dedicated his life to the study of human pee.
Oh, my goodness, I'm back in the... That must mean that it's time for the most awkwardly named segment here on Crash Course, the biolography. His name was William Prout, and in the early 1800s he became fascinated with human digestion, especially our urine. And that's because he thought that the best way to understand the human body was through chemistry, and the best way to understand the body's chemistry was to understand what it does to food. By day, he was a practicing physician, but every morning before breakfast he did research in his home laboratory in London. And there he did many great things, like being the first to discover that our stomachs contained hydrochloric acid, and writing a breakthrough book about kidney stones called An Inquiry into the Nature and Treatment of Gravel, Calculus, and Other Diseases Connected with a Deranged Operation of Urinary Organs. And he was, of course, the first person to discover the chemical composition of pure urea, the main component of urine. For the record, here it is, and in the presence of water, urea gives off ammonia, which is why your pee smells. Through his years of studying urine, Prout came to the conclusion that all foodstuffs fell into three categories: the saccharinous, carbohydrates, the oleaginous, the fats, and the albuminous, the proteins. He went so far as to say that in order to be healthy, you needed to eat all three of these things, not just, sheep kidneys and gin, which is probably what most of London was living on at the time. But like many great minds, Prout was overlooked in his own lifetime because while he was studying actual science, everybody else was walking around believing that the color of your urine was determined by your personality. And this guy looks like a total jerk to me. And if you can tell that much by color, I wonder what you can tell by taste.
Now, he didn't understand that there were biological molecules. He didn't understand what these things were, but he did understand that there were three ingredients necessary for life. And it turns out that all organisms either need to synthesize or ingest those ingredients in order to live. We're going to start out with the most basic of these ingredients for life, and that is the carbohydrate. You've no doubt heard of them. You may, in fact, be avoiding them like the plague. But the fact is that nothing and no one can avoid carbohydrates because they are the source of all energy that we have available to us. Carbohydrates are made up of sugars, and the simplest of them are called monosaccharides. Mono for one, saccharides for the actual root of the word sugar. The star of the show here is glucose, because it's truly fundamental, by which I mean like number one on the global food chain, because it comes from the sun. All biological energy is originally captured from the sun by plants as glucose through photosynthesis. And every cell that needs energy uses glucose to get that energy through a process called respiration. In addition to glucose, there are other monosaccharides like fructose, which has the same molecular formula, C6H12O6, but arranged differently. These subtle chemical differences do matter. Fructose, for example, is significantly sweeter than glucose. It's also processed by our bodies in different ways. And then there are disaccharides, which, like the name says, are just two monosaccharides put together. And the most famous of these is sucrose, which is simply a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule joined by a covalent bond. Mono and disaccharides are pretty much little niblets of energy that are really easy for our bodies to process. But when these carbohydrates start to form into longer and longer chains, their function and their roles change as well. Instead of being sources for instant energy, they become storehouses of energy or structural compounds. These are polysaccharides. Instead of being just 2 or 3 monosaccharides put together, polysaccharides can contain thousands of simple sugar units. And because they're so big and burly, they're great for building with. In plants, cellulose is the most common structural compound. It's just a bunch of glucose molecules bound together, and it is the most common organic compound on the planet. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to digest. Cows can do it, but humans certainly cannot, which is why you don't enjoy eating grass. Polysaccharides are also really good for storing energy, and not just structurally, but just as an energy store. And that's where we get bread. Now, really interesting thing here, bread made up of starch, the most simple of which is called amylose. Amylose and cellulose look almost exactly identical, but one is grass and the other is bread. Like, chemistry. Plants store glucose in the form of starch, and it comes in lots and lots of different forms, from roots and tubers to the sweet flesh of fruits to the starchy seeds of the wheat plant that end up being milled into flour. Ground up grain is the main ingredient in the bread, of course, and most of the calories, or the energy content, comes from carbohydrates. When I eat this, and I'm going to eat the hell out of it, I'm going to be eating all of the chemical energy that this wheat plant got from the sun in order to feed its next generation of seeds that we then stole for our own use. All for me. Now, we as human beings can't grow fruits or tubers, so we have to store our energy in a couple of different ways. The way that we tend to store carbohydrate energy is in glycogen, which is very similar to amylose or starch, but has more branches and is more complicated. It's basically made up of the glucose that we have left over after we eat, and it sits in our muscles really ready to use, and it's also stored in our livers. It's generally a pretty short-term store. If we don't eat for like a day, pretty much all of our glycogen gets depleted. But over the longer term, the way that we store our energy is through fat. All of our mom's worst enemies, the fat, which turn out to be actually really important and are the most familiar sort of a very important biological molecule, the lipid. Lipids are smaller and simpler than complex carbohydrates, and they're grouped together because they share an inability to dissolve in water. This is because their chemical bonds are mostly nonpolar. And since water, as we learned in the previous episode, despises nonpolar molecules, the two do not mix. It's like oil and water. In fact, it's exactly like oil and water. And if you've ever read a nutrition label or seen this thing called the television, you're probably pretty conversant in the way that we classify fats. But then, 99% of us have no idea what those classifications actually mean. Fats are made up mainly of two chemical ingredients, glycerol, which is a kind of alcohol, and fatty acids, which are long carbon-hydrogen chains that end in a carboxyl group. When you get three fatty acid molecules together and connect them to a glycerol, that's a triglyceride. These feature prominently in things like butter and peanut butter and oils and the white parts of meat. These triglycerides can either be saturated or unsaturated, and I know that when we put the word fat and saturated into the same sentence, it sounds like an evening at KFC, but here we're talking about being saturated with hydrogen. As you hopefully remember from our first lesson, carbon is very nimble in how it uses its 4 electrons. It can form single or double or even sometimes triple bonds. This means that if the carbon atoms in a fatty acid are connected to each other with single bonds, all of the carbon atoms end up connected to at least 2 hydrogen atoms, and one of them picks up a third. So the fatty acid is saturated with hydrogen. But when some of the carbon atoms are connected to each other with double bonds, all of those carbon's electrons are spoken for, and so they're not able to pick up those hydrogen atoms. This means that they're not saturated with hydrogen, and they are unsaturated fatty acids. To demonstrate, may I direct your attention to this jar of peanut butter. Here you can kind of see both kinds of fat. The liquid stuff you see at the top here, that is the unsaturated fat, which we generally think of as oils. The pasty stuff down here also contains lots of unsaturated fat, but also contains saturated fat, which doesn't have any double bonds, so it can pack more tightly and form solids at room temperature. And there are also other fat classifications that you've heard of. Trans fats, which everyone tells you never to eat. They're right, don't eat them. They don't exist in nature and are basically unsaturated fatty acids that instead of kinking, go straight across, and so they're extra super bad for you. Don't eat them. Omega-3 fats are fatty acids that are unsaturated at the 3 position, which is like right there. Then that's the only difference. But the reason why these are important is because we can't synthesize them ourselves. They're essential fatty acids, meaning that we need to eat them in order to get them. All this is starting to make me pretty hungry. But before we get to more food stuff, there are some unappetizing sort of lipids that we also need to talk about. So remember that triglycerides are 3 fatty acids connected to a glycerol. Swap one of those fatty acids out for a phosphate group and you have a phospholipid. And these make up cell membrane walls. Since that phosphate group gives that end a polarity, it's attracted to water. And the other end is nonpolar and it avoids water. So if you were to scatter a bunch of phospholipids into some water, they would automatically arrange themselves like this, with the hydrophobic ends facing each other and the hydrophilic ends sticking out to face the water. Every cell in your body uses this natural structure to form its cell wall in order to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. Another class of lipids is the steroids. Steroids have a backbone of 4 interconnected carbon rings, which can be used to form hundreds of variations. The most fundamental of them is cholesterol, which binds with phospholipids to help form cell walls. But these can also be activated to turn into different lipid hormones. And so now we approach the most complicated, powerful, polymorphously awesome chemicals in our body, the protein. And by complicated, I mean that they are probably the most complicated chemical compounds on the planet. In fact, they're so amazing that we're going to do a separate episode on them and how they are created by DNA. But right now, in you, there are tens of thousands of proteins doing everything they can to keep you alive. There are enzymes regulating chemical processes, helping you digest food. There are antibodies connecting themselves to invaders like bacterium and viruses so that your immune system can get them. There are protein endorphins that like mess around with your brain and make you like feel emotions. They're everywhere. They do everything. And proteins do all of this stuff using just 20 different ingredients, and these are the amino acids. Just like fatty acids, amino acids have a carboxyl group at one end, and on the other end, they have an amino group, amino acid. Now hey, I don't know if you noticed this, but this is the first time that nitrogen has shown up in our food. This is super important because despite the fact that nitrogen is like everywhere, it's like 80% of the air, we can't just pull it out of the air and put it into our bodies. We have to get nitrogen from food, and so we have to eat foods that are high in protein, like this egg, which by its very virtue, because it is all the white part is protein, it contains a goodly amount of nitrogen. Now in the middle of the amino and the acid group is a carbon, and it shares one of its electrons with good old hydrogen, and the other electron is free to be shared with R, which is just a kind of fill in the blank. We call it the R group. It could also be called a side chain, and there are 20 different kinds of side chains. Whatever fits in that blank will determine the shape and the function of that amino acid. So if you put this in there, you get valine, which is an amino acid that does a lot of stuff like protecting and building muscle tissue. And if you put this in there, you get tryptophan, which may be best known for its role in helping you regulate mood and energy levels. Amino acids form long chains called polypeptides. Proteins are formed when these polypeptides not only connect, but elaborate in, frankly, really elegant structures. They fold, they coil, they twist. If they were sculptures, I would go to the museum every day just to look at them, and I'd walk straight past the nudes without even looking. But protein synthesis is only possible if you have all of the amino acids necessary, and there are 9 of them that we can't make ourselves. Histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. By eating foods that are high in protein, we can digest them down into their base particles and then use these essential amino acids in building up our own proteins. Some foods, especially ones that contain animal protein, have all of the essential amino acids, including this egg. And that concludes this triple-decker sandwich of biological awesomeness, which is all we need to be happy, healthy people. And I'm sure, because of that, it's going to be delicious. Nope. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course. We'll be discussing something else very interesting next week. I don't even know what it is. Don't forget, go back, reinforce what you have learned today by going back and watching bits that you may not feel like you got completely. We'll also, of course, be available on Facebook and Twitter if you would like to ask us questions or give us suggestions there.
Good Lord. All right. That is, a brief breakdown of all those nutrients, right? And sort of how they operate and, what we're seeing and stuff. What's up, Daryl? How you doing, Alexis? Good to see you guys. So now
I'm good, thank you. I was having trouble
good.
getting in this morning. I was having trouble with my internet, so but I am in the morning class because I won't be in the night class.
Got it. And trust me, I've been there, so you are good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the process of digestion really quick. We'll just, we've been through this in detail, so we'll move through it relatively quickly. But as we're talking about it, right, we probably the most well-known part of your digestive system is going to be your stomach, right? This is sort of not the beginning of your GI tract, and that's something to think about. Like when you think about your digestive system, is it's a tract, right? It's like this big, kind of tube that runs, and so food like starts here and then travels down and sits here for a little bit, and then it works its way across the small intestine until it gets to the very end, and then makes kind of a lap around before like exiting out of the body. So when we're talking about the digestive system, we're talking about this tract. So we're probably going to start by talking about the stomach. There's a little bit of digestion that does take place at your mouth. Obviously you have saliva, which has this enzyme in it called salivary amylase. You've also got a little bit of what's called lingual lipase, and both of those things are chemicals that help break down. Lingual lipase breaks down a little bit of fat, and salivary amylase breaks down a little bit of carbohydrates. And so, that's why those things kind of taste good, is because they start to break down immediately once they hit your saliva. So then eventually, once we've done a little bit of breakdown there, we'll drop it into our stomach, and our stomach is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to digestion, right? So it's a pouch that receives the food, right? And it's filled with hydrochloric acid and other materials that help break down that food. And what you're left with is this wet, goopy mixture called chyme, where it's not really food anymore. It's basically just this wet, soupy suspension of nutrients, right? So that chyme is like, it's what used to be your food, but it's so broken down at this point that all the nutrients just kind of suspended there. And so if you were just to pour that chyme over your small intestine, which has all of these like little tubes in it that called villi, right, that have blood vessels in them, basically start to absorb those nutrients through the membrane of the villi so that it gets into our actual bloodstream. And then our bloodstream does what it normally does. It continues traveling through the body in kind of a big cycle to the heart, to the body, to the heart, to wherever it happens to be going. And that way we supply our right big toe, with glucose when it needs to be able to produce energy, So the small intestine is where the main heavy lifting of absorption takes place. There's a little bit of digestion that still takes place in the small intestine. So for instance, in the very beginning portion of the small intestine, you'll have what are called like brush bordered disaccharides and things like that do kind of break down carbohydrates a little bit further. Also, there is a connection at the very beginning of your small intestine to these three little organs that are going to kind of help us out here. We've got our liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. And what happens is the liver is going to create this material that is called bile. And bile is what helps emulsify our fats. So basically, your liver needs to create bile because fat is something that survives pretty well through the stomach acid. Like we're not so good at breaking down lipids. Like hydrochloric acid does a really good job of breaking proteins and carbohydrates and things like that. It doesn't do a great job with lipids though. So we have to have a different material in order to do that. Kind of like, water does a really good job of breaking down most things. Like when you're scrubbing your walls or something, like water works really well. But it doesn't work very well on like oils, right? So we need to have like soap in there to break down oils and grease and things like that. So lipids break down thanks to bile. Bile is basically kind of like dish soap that your liver creates. And then your pancreas does create a couple other enzymes that if there are any carbohydrates that didn't get broken down in the stomach, or if there's any final proteins that didn't get fully released into straight up amino acids, your pancreas can create some enzymes that also release into the same area of the small intestine to do that as well. Now your gallbladder doesn't necessarily make anything of its own. Your gallbladder basically is this little pear-shaped organ that stores the bile that was made by your liver. And then its job is just kind of drop that bile off. That way, like you always have a goodly amount of bile available if you have like a super fatty meal or something like that. It's very easy for you to kind of keep up with that high fat amount. So that's what your liver does. Your liver makes the bile, your pancreas makes the enzymes like pancreatic amylase, and your gallbladder stores that bile, and all of it gets dropped off in your small intestine. And now, like in the first part of your small intestine, we call that your duodenum. And that is where the final bit of digestion takes place. And now, when we're talking about the small intestine, the thing that we're most concerned with is the absorption process, right? We want to basically get all those nutrients into our bloodstream. So we need to have lots of exposure to blood if we're going to get all of this material into our bloodstream. And so we have a massive amount of surface area in our small intestine because it's made up of these, little like rods that kind of look like this, right? Those are called villi, right? And those villi have little blood vessels that, these little tubes that kind of branch out kind of like that. And then like that's where, carbohydrates and carbohydrates and proteins and fat can just kind of and vitamins and minerals actually can just kind of work their way. And now they're going to get exposed to the actual bloodstream. And that way they're going to, carry here. And then that's going to go, first place this is going to go, this is actually going to go through your liver. Ironically, I know the liver was secreting stuff to the outside, but it also does stuff inside. And your liver is going to detoxify anything, kill any like foreign bacteria, viruses, or enzymes that shouldn't be in the body. And it's going to kind of wreck all that stuff, kill all your toxins. If it's alcohol, it's going to break down alcohol, for instance. And then, it'll continue passing throughout, it'll go to the heart and then it gets pumped around and you're left with all the good stuff. But that's what your small intestine does. It's basically just filled with these little villi. And so when you look at it, if you look at what the small intestine actually kind of looks like on the inside, it looks like this. That's a crazy amount of surface area. There's a lot of places where we can absorb nutrients through those walls, and that's really the whole point, right? So you can see the blood vessels in there, and then you can just see there's just all these little, fingers kind of reaching out, surrounding in the small intestine. So if you fill this whole area with, chyme, all those nutrients are going to pass straight into the bloodstream. Then eventually food is going to move into our large intestine, which is the final portion of the gastrointestinal tract. And what will happen is like, any materials that didn't get absorbed in the small intestine, we might get a little absorption that takes place here. But the really big part of our large intestine that it does, it's very, very, very good at absorbing some of our minerals and our water-soluble vitamins. So there is a difference, right? We're going to see vitamins later today. There's a difference between the fat-soluble type and the water-soluble type. The fat-soluble type dissolve and are transported with fat. And the water-soluble type dissolve and are transported with water. And your large intestine is where you absorb all your water. Think about like that chyme, right? Chyme is this really wet, soupy mixture, right? So there's a lot of water passively in it. So what's going to start to happen in your large intestine is it's going to filter out all that water. It's going to suck all the water out of that, gastric juice, that chyme. Meanwhile, there's no nutrients really left in it at this point other than the B vitamins and some of your minerals, right? So all the B vitamins, which are carried in water, and vitamin C too, by the way, that's water soluble as well. But all those B vitamins and that vitamin C and all those minerals which are suspended in the water, they start to get pulled with this filter. And now the wet soupy mixture starts to like dehydrate. And so it starts to kind of compress down and become like a solid. And that's where we get our waste from. And that's what we'll end up getting rid of afterwards. So, particularly like electrolytes are absorbed in the large intestine. And the two major electrolytes that we always talk about are sodium and potassium, which are minerals, right? If we look at sodium, you think of like sodium, we're going to see pictures like this. This is not what sodium looks like, right? This is not what sodium looks like in the world. That's sodium and chloride. That's sodium chloride. Sodium and chlorine look like that when they're together. Actual sodium looks like this. It's kind of a rock. It's kind of a metal. Same thing with like potassium. Potassium is an element, kind of looks pretty darn similar actually, right? Also a metal. But if you get those two metals inside the body, right? We use them to create electricity. These are basically like little like magnets with electrons, and we flush them back and forth, and that creates an electric charge. And that's how we get like all of our nervous system signals, right? Those pumps that we talked about in our physiology class. So we definitely need to absorb lots of sodium and lots of potassium in our diet to make sure that we are able to create those electric signals and all of that. So so we're going to absorb any water into our bloodstream. We're going to absorb any remaining electrolytes and minerals into the water, into our bloodstream. And you do have your appendix here as well, by the way. We don't talk about the appendix very often because honestly, we didn't know what it did for a long time. So your appendix is this little accessory organ. I don't know if anybody in here has had their appendix removed, but it's actually, not the most important organ in the world. We can remove it without causing too many problems because we weren't really sure what to do. We used to think that it was what we call a vestigial organ, which is basically like an organ that's like, I don't know, it was used for something up the evolutionary line, but we have no idea what it's used for at this point. So we don't really need it anymore. We call that the vestigial organ. Turns out what we think it does is it basically keeps a record of all of your gut bacteria. So, good bacteria is really good at like growing, right? And so you have a lot of good bacteria in your large intestine. It's actually what helps your large intestine break some stuff down. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to have fiber in your diet, is because you need to feed that gut bacteria. If you ever go on antibiotics and you've had like an upset stomach afterwards, that's because like antibiotics killed your good gut bacteria. Because unfortunately, antibiotics don't know the difference between good bacteria and bad bacteria. So you basically had all your good stuff kind of murdered there. So we think that if you ever get like really sick and you have like, a really rough night and you lose all your gut bacteria because your body is like everything out, and you spend the night in the bathroom, you're going to lose a lot of that gut bacteria. You're going to lose some of those cultures. So the appendix is meant to be sort of an external hard drive or a USB stick that kind of holds on to a record of all that bacteria. And that way it can kind of release that back in and get those cultures started back up. That's what we think. We're not 100% certain still, actually, but we're pretty sure that's what the appendix does. So any questions on the digestive tract? I know it was all review, but anything unclear there? Feeling good? All right. Yeah, question. What's up?
Is there any difference between like white salt and pink salt or other salt?
That's a fun question. Yeah, there is a little bit. So pink salt, what's giving it its color? Well, number one, like regular like white, like iodized salt has just been like bleached using iodine. And then they pull that iodine out of there. But they bleach it to give it that kind of white color. But you also see like naturally occurring, like if you pull salt out of the ocean, usually a lot of times it'll be very white looking as well. So like, where is it getting like pink Himalayan salt? Like, right, where is it getting its color? A lot of times that just means that it has a lot of other minerals in there that are sort of like along for the ride, giving it its color, right? So I'm actually not sure what they are, but what extra minerals are found in pink salt? Yeah, you're gonna see. Yeah, oh, that makes, of course, it's iron. Yeah, that's what's making it red. Yeah, you would get a little bit of extra like calcium, a little bit of extra potassium, a little bit of extra magnesium, and a little bit of extra iron.
Okay.
That being said, the amounts of those are very, very, very small. So don't think of like pink Himalayan salt as a good source of iron. It definitely is not. It's enough to make it change color. And so arguably, I would say it's healthier, like if you asked me, do I prefer like regular or the pink stuff? I would say, yeah, the pink stuff's healthier, but it's probably healthier in the way that like $101 is more than $100. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
Like, yeah, it's better, but it's not, I wouldn't say that it's like a huge difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a fun one. Nutrients. Let's take a look at our macronutrients here. So if we look at our major macronutrients, right, we've got our carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, these big complex chains of all these sugar molecules. So what we're going to do is we're going to break carbohydrates down into a couple different examples, right? Let's see here. Come on, internet, give me 3 of them together. Yep, there we go. Okay. So this is what these are all of our various like sugars here, right? So we can see like this is a molecule of glucose. That's a monosaccharide. That's an individual sugar molecule. Now, there are 2 other monosaccharides as well. We don't talk about them that often because our body breaks them down and then turns them into glucose before it metabolizes them. But you do have 2 other single sugar molecules as well. There is fructose, which is going to be found in fruit, and galactose, which is found in milk. And that's one that actually doesn't cause any problems. If you're lactose intolerant, galactose is fine. So some of the sugar in milk is okay, but we'll talk about where it becomes problematic in a second. So those are your single sugar molecules. Glucose is the big one that we generally tend to talk about. And then we've got fructose and galactose. Then we've got our disaccharides. So those are single sugar molecules. Then we've got our disaccharides. Disaccharides are 2 sugar molecules linked together. So if you've got glucose plus glucose, oh, that's kind of funny. It's not up here. So you've got, if you've got like sucrose, or I'm sorry, if you've got glucose plus fructose, right? So if you take glucose and add it to fructose, that's how you get sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar. This is when you look at like the added sugars found in foods, this is what it is. They're taking a little bit of the fructose from fruit and a little bit of these glucose, and they're adding it together, and it makes this incredibly sweet tasting molecule. And that's what hits our taste buds and lights up our brain. And that is why sugar is so freaking addictive. When we look at that disaccharide, we look at that double sugar molecule, you know, it's adding a bunch, you know, it's just so much freaking sugar all added together. And so it's just really, 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 really sweet tasting. Now there is also lactose. This one right here is galactose plus glucose. You put those 2 together, you end up with lactose. This is the one that if you are lactose intolerant, this is something that we have a hard time breaking down. If you don't have the enzyme lactase, you can't break this molecule. So then this double sugar molecule is too big to get into your bloodstream. So it passes all the way to your large intestine. And when it gets to your large intestine, your gut bacteria, which is used to getting like fiber and like really hard to break down stuff, like Hank said in the video, we can't really break down cellulose. Cows can, but we can't because like it's so fibrous that we don't have the tools necessary. That is 95% true, but we can kind of break down cellulose a little bit with our gut bacteria, but we don't let food sit in our gut bacteria long enough to actually like become nutritious. So we just, you know, use it as waste to get it out of the body. But your gut bacteria, they're not used to, so they have this like thing that's really hard to eat, you know, and it like takes them a really long time to break down. But then you send them just like a simple little sugar molecule, this little double sugar lactose molecule, and the gut bacteria is like, oh my God, this is awesome. And they eat it, and then they, you know, they digest it and they spit out methane. So what ends up happening is like gas builds up like crazy. And this is why people who are lactose intolerant have a really hard time drinking milk and cheese and dairy products, because that lactose gets into their large intestine and their gut bacteria goes crazy on it, and it makes a lot of like gas, and that causes like a lot of cramping and gastrointestinal distress there. So not great feeling. So that's lactose. That's a sugar that's found in milk, right? Because again, galactose plus a little bit of glucose there. There is also maltose, which is glucose plus glucose. That is also going to be found in milk. So milk has 3 different types of sugars in it, right? Lactose, maltose, and errant little galactose molecules. So when you go to the store and you get like lactose-free milk, they're basically just taking that one out of there. Which sometimes means it's lower in sugar, but a lot of times what they'll do in lactose-free milk is they'll just add sucrose back in. They'll add just like just basically sugar straight into the milk to make it taste sweet again, which is why honestly lactose-free milk sometimes tastes, depending on the company you're buying it from, tastes sweeter than regular milk. Those are your disaccharides. Those are your double sugar molecules. They're really simple. They're still very, 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 very simple. Your body is able to just kind of basically, take this little double sugar molecule and break it in half, and all of a sudden, you've got separate stuff. And then we've got our polysaccharides. So polysaccharides are many sugar molecules linked together. These are our complicated, complex carbs, right? So the 3 major ones that we're going to talk about are cellulose, starch, and glycogen. So cellulose, I think you said in the video, it's the most common compound found on the planet because it's what's making up all the leaves in different foods. It's what's making up the bark on a tree. It's even insects have a little bit of like cellulose making up their body actually. They mostly have like chitin, which is more of a starch than anything, but it's kind of similar. So cellulose is very common here on the planet, but it's not something we're able to break down. It's actually so complicated and so tightly packed together that we're not really able to break it apart. Like, it's like it's like Lego blocks that are just really wrenched down, like, and you're just gonna have a really hard time like snapping them off, That's what cellulose is. So we do need to consume cellulose. We do need to have fiber in our diet, about 25 to 35 grams of worth a day, because we actually want this thing that we can't break down, because what it does, it goes through our digestive system and pulls out any of the gunk, because sometimes like, that chyme, it's got all kinds of nutrients in it. A lot of it gets absorbed. Some of it's just going to kind of passively sit around, or maybe you consume something that wasn't food. Maybe you consumed like a little bit of something that, your body can't digest, if you chew your fingernails, this is gross. You chew your fingernails and then you swallow it, right? Like, what's going to happen to that? It can't be absorbed by your bloodstream, So fiber is going to come along and grab that stuff and pull it out of the body. And that's what cellulose kind of does for us. And then the other 2 complex carbs that we got to talk about are starches. Starches are what you think of when you think of complex carbs. You think of like whole grains, like wheat, the carbohydrates found in beans, the carbohydrates found in rice or other grains. Or a potato, right? Or even like the large amounts of carbs found in like vegetables and stuff. The outer membrane is going to be made of cellulose. Like you look at a green bean, and then there's going to be some starches in there as well. So in the way that we store body fat on our body as a means to like have stored energy, vegetables, plants, they store like their fat that they store. Some of them store fat. That's where you get like nuts and seeds and stuff. But a lot of them store energy as starches. They store it as this complex carb. So that's what we refer to as a starch. And there's a lot of them. I don't know all of them. In fact, if you want to know more about like which starches are which, you need to talk to a chef. But they'll tell you the difference. Like the reason one potato tastes different than another one is because there are slightly different versions of their starches. But for the most part, we can just kind of classify them as a starch in general, and it's a complex carb. Okay, it's going to be, it's going to take a lot longer to break down because, like, you're going to have to work to break all those sugar molecules off individually, rather than a simple disaccharide where you're just like, you just kind of break it in half. And then we do have glycogen, and glycogen is our version of a starch. Glycogen is the starch that we make. In the same way that I said plants store fat a little bit, and then they mostly store like carbohydrates in order to like give them energy later. Well, we mostly store fat, but then we also like to store carbohydrates. Our version of carbohydrate storage is glycogen. It's this wet, soupy mixture that lives mostly in our liver, but then it is also in all of our muscles throughout the body. So that is also an example of a polysaccharide. That's a big complex chain of sugar molecules. So mono, the prefix means singular, means one. Di is the prefix that means two, and poly is a prefix that means many. There is also oligo. Oligo is like in the middle between like di and poly. It's like a complex carb that's not as complex as like a major polysaccharide. You never hear that term though. You never really hear the word oligosaccharides. Doesn't come up that often because it's still poly. You know what I mean? If it's more than two, it's many. It's poly. You know. So we definitely need to break down these carbohydrates, and we're going to do it thanks to like these enzymes that we find inside of our body, right? So one of them is amylase, right? We have our salivary amylase made by our saliva glands that helps us digest these big complex carbs. We take a polysaccharide, like a starch of some type, like something found in a potato, and we put it into our saliva. Your salivary amylase will start to break that down, but it can't. You know, and remember, your digestive system's job is to break complex carbs into single sugar molecules. Well, amylase isn't good enough at breaking stuff down into single sugar molecules. Instead, it is able to break them down into disaccharides, so little double sugar molecules, but it can't get it all the way broken down into singles. That's where you're going to need the rest of your digestive system. So it splits polysaccharides into disaccharides, puts many sugar molecules into double sugar molecules. You also have pancreatic amylase. That's the one made by your pancreas. And it's in charge of like, okay, you get some disaccharides, let's fully break those down into individual sugars. Or if you've got a complex carb that survived your salivary amylase, which probably did, if you've got something that survived there, then your pancreatic amylase can break down big complex carbs, polysaccharides into, you know, single sugar molecules. And then you've also got brush border disaccharides. These are actually little enzymes that live in the intestinal walls. So they actually live on your villi, and they break any double sugar molecules into like full single sugar molecules. So, you know, you think about like, let's see if I can just like kind of copy this here. I'm just going to take this one. So if you imagine like a villi, right? And it kind of looks like this, right? And it's got like a slot for carbohydrates right here. It's got a slot for an individual. We'll put it up here, actually. We'll say this has got a little hole in it, a little wall there for individual sugar molecules, right? Well, this is too big, right? Like I can't fit this through the hole. So a brush border disaccharide is a little enzyme that might live like right here. We'll put this little enzyme right there. And so what'll happen is as this disaccharide brushes against that enzyme, it causes a chemical reaction and this splits. And now this is small enough to get into the bloodstream. And now this one is also small enough to get into the bloodstream, those individual sugar molecules. So that's what brush border disaccharides do. They basically split disaccharides into monosaccharides. So how do we actually get this in? Well, we're going to get it through the process of diffusion, right? Most of it's through diffusion. So just going back to high school biology here, talking about diffusion. So diffusion is the process of like moving water from one place to another. I mean, it's actually the process of moving stuff from one place to another. Water's not a very, osmosis is the movement of water. But so here's what's really cool. Remember how I told you guys, if you want to understand why stuff moves, right? Like the whole universe is like constantly moving chemicals from point A to point B. Why does it move the way it does? Like what's going on there? Well, nature hates a gradient. Nature hates it when there's a lot of stuff over here and very little stuff over here. So if you were to create like a wall with a membrane that has some holes in it, right? Like your digestive system, for instance, and you put just like a bunch of stuff over here, you know, just like you have a whole bunch of materials on this side, right? And you only have like a couple materials on this side, nature is naturally going to want to move stuff from here to here, right? It wants to move it from this side to this side until eventually you end up 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Until eventually you end up with an equal amount on both sides. Now nature's nice and happy. You know, that's diffusion, right? This stuff here diffused over here. So because there's a lot of sugar in your digestive tract and there's not so much sugar in your blood, that sugar passively, those carbohydrates passively move into our bloodstream. Now there is also facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion would be like if I had this like a little membrane here, you know, kind of separating things. If I put like a specific pump here, that looks something kind of like this. And we'll make another one. Oh, can I not flip that around? Oh, that's so dumb. Really? Like it literally just only goes the one way. There's not another one. Oh, that's insanity. So if I made a little like pump that looks something kind of like this, right? And what this can do is this can like swing open and closed, right? So like right now, let's say I like close it, right? I would just sort of like put that like that. If I open it and that actually like pumped materials against like, you know, a gradient where it's like, no, we're happy. There's an equal amount of stuff on both sides, but we use these pumps to actually like push things, you know, from one side to another. We call that facilitated diffusion. And so like these little pumps here will actually sort of like swing back and forth and actually move stuff across the membrane, even if nature doesn't want it to go that way. That's actually how your neurons work when we move sodium and potassium from one place to another. That's why it takes energy. So diffusion passively doesn't take any energy. Like stuff just naturally wants to move from an area of high concentration to low concentration. Your blood and moving oxygen uses passive diffusion, right? Like there's no oxygen in your blood and there's a lot of oxygen over here. So oxygen naturally moves into the blood. Suddenly your blood cell goes to a tissue. There's no oxygen in the tissue, but there's lots of oxygen in the blood. Oxygen naturally moves into the tissue. That's passive. Doesn't take any energy to do that. Facilitated diffusion, pumping this stuff against the concentration gradient. That takes energy. You know, that actually is going to take energy to allow that to move. And it would look something kind of like this. You can see there's the membrane there, and you can see it's basically scooping it and throwing it onto the inside. So it sort of grabs it, scoops it, and throws it inside. That's facilitated diffusion, right? It starts at this shape, grabs the molecule, opens up into that shape. Takes a little bit of energy to make that happen. Those protein pumps need to move. There's also active transport. Active transport's kind of cool. It's where a material will actually grab something and just carry it across from one side to another, kind of like a you know, like a bouncer at a club being like, you gotta go, and they just take that person out the door. You know, like that's active transport. And then there's endocytosis, and endocytosis is probably the coolest one. That's where like let's see if I can find a picture or a GIF of this. Endocytosis is probably the coolest one where, yeah. So what'll happen is, you know, something will come along and then the cell will actually sort of wrap itself. Boy, that's a slow GIF. It'll sort of wrap itself around the material. Oh, come on, internet, please give me a GIF. Give me an animation. All right, well, we'll just look at a picture here. So endocytosis is the opposite of what this picture is showing. The arrows are going the wrong way. So endocytosis would be like a material goes here, and then the cell would actually wrap itself around. So like if a material like landed in my palms and then I wrapped myself around, and then opened up the inside. Now that material's coming this way. That's endocytosis. What we're seeing in this picture, this is called exocytosis. This is how your cells poop. Basically, the material goes to the end, and then it's on coming up to this side, and so it wraps itself around and then spits out the waste product. So endocytosis. So that's actually how your cells kind of work. There we go. Here's some endocytosis. You can see this material. So it'll kind of work itself around, kind of wrap itself around. This is how your immune system works, by the way. Basically, like your immune system is just kind of passively running through your bloodstream. And if it comes along like a virus or something, it's like, you're not supposed to be here. It just kind of like wraps itself around that and then just like dissolves it. And then poops out. The exocytosis is the remainder. That's how vaccines work. Is you keep the blueprint from that little virus, and that way we know how to fight it in the future. So those are how we get these materials in, right? Most of it is passive diffusion. You think about like water soluble vitamins, for instance, just kind of passively move in thanks to water. They kind of move from one side to the other. We've also got a little bit of facilitated diffusion. That's how fat soluble vitamins get into the bloodstream, right? We need to carry fat from one side, that's active transport. Actually, active transport is how we move how we move fat soluble vitamins from one side to the other. We carry it with fat. Facilitated diffusion's more like pumping stuff in actively. And then endocytosis is a membrane actually sort of like wrapping itself around and then opening up. We don't do a lot of endocytosis in the digestive system. We do it mostly in the in the immune system. But so that's how all these materials are kind of getting into our blood. So what'll happen, the first stop that your body is going to make with your blood, right, is it's going to go through your liver. So carbohydrates and other materials are going to pass straight through the liver. It goes through what's called your hepatic portal system. And it looks like this. This is sort of what your liver actually kind of looks like in the end. So it's going to be passing straight through, like there's your large intestine, there's your small intestine, right? Goes straight into your blood, goes right into the liver there, right? See all those little tubes branching through the liver? That's where your liver is basically going to give anything that survived your digestive system. I mean, most viruses, think about how many viruses, think about how much bacteria is on your food. If you pull a steak right off of the grill, it's really freaking hot. And so no bacteria, no viruses are going to live through that process, right? Until it's sitting on your plate for 30 seconds and it's cooled down enough. And then all these viruses and bacteria are landing on your food and you're constantly eating it, right? Like, that's happening all day, guys. You are eating bacteria and viruses constantly. But what's going to happen, and parasites, fun fact. But what's going to happen is it goes into your hydrochloric acid of your stomach. So here's a fun story to kind of highlight this. This is a time that I got really argumentative and really combative. I was on my way to a wedding and I'm driving up the 101. I'm like on the road for hours. I think I was on the 101 at the time, but I was on my way to San Francisco for this wedding and bored. And so I'm listening to the radio and I don't know how I ended up like switching to it, but I think this is like during the election. So I was like somewhat trying to find like some news to listen to. And you guys remember a couple of years ago, the guy who sued Roundup? He was like a custodian or a groundskeeper, and he sued the company Roundup for he got cancer, right? And he was like, hey, I wasn't told that these chemicals would cause cancer and stuff, and he had like neurological problems and all this and that. And Roundup is a huge company and they make lots of money. And this is not me trying to be political or anything, but like a lot of like major like conservatives were backing Roundup, and they were like, hey, like Roundup's a good company, and this worker he's like, there's just he got cancer, has nothing to do with Roundup, he got it and it's from something else, he's probably a smoker. And everybody's like really like talking about this. And one of the things that you would hear that was like a talking point was when they were first inventing Roundup and they went to like the CDC to get it like approved and like to allow like it to be like a thing, right? Like the FDA and the CDC make sure that like materials are safe, right? So he goes to the FDA and this guy drinks Roundup, like the weed killer, and he drinks it in front of everybody. And he's like, yep, it's totally fine. And here's the thing. The reason that guy's going to be fine is because like if you put this chemical into your hydrochloric acid, it'll break it down. It's just going to, that's what your immune system does. Your innate immune system will take care of that for the most part. All the viruses, all the bacteria you eat all day gets into your blood, gets into your hydrochloric acid. It destroys most of it. Now, obviously, we've all probably had food poisoning at some point. Sometimes it survives, sometimes it lives. And if it does, then that's where the other parts of your immune system go, oh, we need to throw up. We need to get this out of here. But like this guy, so everybody was using that as an argument, be like, see, like that guy didn't get cancer and he drank it. But that's the difference between putting stuff through your digestive system, which destroys everything that it can, and then eventually goes through your liver, which will then further destroy and detoxify things. That's a very safe way to do that. Versus putting it into your lungs, which is what he was doing. He was breathing it, and they didn't tell him that it was airborne, and nobody talked about how dangerous it was to breathe it in. And it gets into your and it gets straight into your bloodstream that way. And that's where it can cause cancers and stuff. So I'm listening to the radio and I'm hearing this guy spout off this. And he's like, see, this guy drank all this stuff and it was perfectly fine. And I like called in and I like got into an argument with this guy. And I was like, I think that you just don't understand how our digestive system works. Like, this is not even a complicated concept, but like, it's just not, something that you're kind of specialized in. So I get where you're coming from, but that's not how it works. And the guy was just like, I don't know if I believe you, blah, 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 blah. I think that. And I was like, look, man, like, this is how it works. It's very simple biology. So I got into an argument with this radio host up in the Bay Area once, talking about how the hepatic portal system works. And I was like, look, if you put it through your stomach acid and then it goes straight through your liver, it's gonna kill it all. But if you put it into your lungs, it's gonna make you sick. This is another reason why, guys, like, I am not a fan, if you're gonna like partake in cannabis and stuff, I'm not a big fan of putting it through your lungs. It's a more efficient way to get it into your bloodstream, but it is also like putting a lot of like other stuff in there as well. So that is, we want to give our digestive system time to break this stuff down. So first place that blood goes, that'll hopefully help you remember that the first place that blood goes is through your liver. That's the very first place it's always going to go. And your liver is going to grab a good chunk of those sugar molecules, and it's actually going to store it. Because your liver is sort of like the center of like where your blood travels, other than obviously your heart. Your heart is the pump, right? But because your liver is like where your blood sort of like gets detoxified and stuff, if your blood sugar levels ever get really low, your liver can be in charge of releasing some sugar back into your blood to keep your blood sugar levels neutral. And that's why liver is going to have a lot of glycogen in it. So glycogen, our version of stored carbohydrates, we store that in our liver, and we store it in all of our muscles as well. And that way your muscles can have instant sugar available. Now, one other hormone that we got to talk about, insulin. Insulin's job is to lower your blood sugar levels. Its job is to create that glycogen. So like if your blood sugar levels are really high, your pancreas, which again, your pancreas was spitting out pancreatic amylase to the digestive system, inside the body, internally in the blood cells or the blood vessels, it's releasing insulin and glucagon, two different hormones. Insulin is in charge of taking high amounts of sugar in your blood and throwing them into that glycogen, throwing them into the liver to become glycogen, or triggering, throwing it into your muscles to become glycogen. Or if it doesn't have anywhere to put that sugar, and the glycogen stores are already full, it'll instead convert it into triglycerides. It'll actually convert it into a fat. Because remember, we're about to get into fats, and chemically they're the same as carbohydrates. So then it'll get in there and become a triglyceride, and it'll store it into your fat cells for long-term storage. And that's what insulin's job is. Glucagon is the exact opposite. Glucagon is also made by your pancreas, and its job is to go, whoa, our blood sugar levels are really low, and it will release glycogen. And that way, like, that sugar gets back into your blood and raises. This is usually where you start to feel hungry, when you start to create that glucagon. So we have these little membranes, these little like carrier proteins that are responsible for that. You got what are called your GLUT1 and GLUT4 proteins, and their job is to kind of respond to that insulin. And that is carbohydrates. That's the most complicated. That's where we spend most of our time talking about metabolism. We always use carbohydrates as kind of our standard example. I think proteins are more fun. I think fats are kind of boring. They're kind of simple. But that is carbohydrates in a nutshell. Any questions or comments on sugars, on carbohydrates? Insulin or the liver, anything like that? Everybody feeling good?
Yep.
No.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Now, what's the difference between pastas and bread?
Sure. Honestly, not much. They are practically the same thing. They look a little bit different. That's where, again, I could not tell you. They're going to both be polysaccharides. I'm not sure which polysaccharides they are. Like, that's where you're going to need to talk to a chef. You know, they're going to know the difference there. In my opinion, they're both just complex carbs. You know, the reason pasta starts nice and hard, though, I can tell you this, whereas like bread is nice and soft. Bread's going to have a slightly higher water content and slightly lower protein content. The protein that you're going to find in pasta is going to be a little bit higher. Like the egg that they put in pasta to, like, you know, that's how you do it. It's like egg and flour, right? It hardens, and that's why like pasta shells are so hard until you put them in boiling water and then they break down. You're basically busting up the proteins and unfolding them and making them soft to eat. So yeah, I could. That's you stumped me a little bit, Daryl. I can't tell you. I know the two, you know, complex carbs that I know are pectin and amylopectin. And I probably knew other ones at some point, but if you want to do that, I will say, if you guys want to watch a really cool YouTube channel, I'll put the link in here real quick. What's eating potatoes? Is that the one? Yeah, this guy right here. This is like America's Test Kitchen, which is like a very scientific cooking channel. So this is where he's going to talk about the difference between like waxy potatoes and like starchy potatoes. I'll put this video in here. This whole series, What's Eating Dan, is super fun. He talks about like the science of Brussels sprouts. That's a really fun one. But he does like he does like these scientific ways to cook that make your cooking better. And I freaking love it. But that would be, he would tell you the difference between those different starches. They're basically, they're both starches at the end of the day. They just look different. So, yeah, you stumped me, Daryl. Nobody wants me to cook for them.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You know, like wheat bread and white bread. I know wheat bread is much better, like grain is much better, but like what's the benefit of white bread?
Okay, so the benefit of white bread.
Yeah, like is there any benefit, or even the wheat and the white? I just want to know.
Yes, so wheat bread's going to be better. Now that being said, like white bread, if it's like fortified, maybe you could argue that it's better.
But it doesn't have no benefit, like it's pretty much.
Yeah, white bread is not going to be better than wheat bread. Whole grain bread, which is wheat, right, is going to be better for you in general. I'm sure there's a scenario out there in the world where I'm wrong, like a very specific small population of people who like need white bread for some very specific reason. But in general, wheat bread is going to be healthier because the reason it's brown, in the same way that like our salt earlier was pinkish because of the extra minerals,
Yeah.
what's making wheat bread brown is the fact that it still has the cellulose. Like that's the color of wheat, right? Like that's what that grain actually looks like. You're seeing this color present in the food still, because there's still a lot of that fiber left over. And that's why we look at like whole grain bread versus like white bread. You look at them, the calories are practically the same. In fact, actually, usually wheat bread has higher calories because it usually has more carbs in it. But you see this, in this case, the carbs are the same. And then this has 4 times as much fiber as this one and 4 times as much protein. So that's what's giving it its color. And that's why it's healthier.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So those are our carbohydrates. So let's look at fats. Fats, way simpler. Way simpler. So these are lipids. These are made of a glycerol molecule and then 3 little fatty acids. So we call that a triglyceride. So generally, when we're talking about consuming fats, we're talking about eating triglycerides. These are the ones that have lots of energy in them. These are where we get the majority of our calories. Now, that being said, there are also other types of fats, right? We've got our triglycerides. That's a 3 fatty acid molecule, right? So you can see here, looks like this. This is a saturated triglyceride. In this picture, if this kinked off a little bit, like I can't actually like rotate this, but if this, can I rotate just like a little bit? Yeah, let's say it goes like this. Let's say it kinks off like that. Then we know it's an unsaturated fat. This would be like an oil would look like this. And the reason like oils are liquid at room temperature is because of this. This makes it very difficult for you to stack them efficiently. So they're a liquid. The molecules are far apart versus like a solid where the molecules would be stacked very tightly together. So this is your classic saturated fat right here, right in this version here. So that's a triglyceride. You can see this is a molecule of glycerol right here. And then here's a fatty acid. Oops. Here's a fatty acid. Here's a fatty acid. And here's another fatty acid. So we got 3 fatty acids, right? Now you could also have a diglyceride. If I just delete this and you got 2 fatty acids, that's a double fat molecule. It's a diglyceride. Diglycerides are what make up our cell walls. So you do need to consume diglycerides in your diet. We call those our omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. We get those from like fish is a good source of omega-3s. And we get like omega-6s from things like oils, like olive oils and things like that. And then there's monoglycerides. There are single fat molecules where, that's pretty much a free fatty acid attached just a little bit of glycerol there. And so pretty easy to metabolize that. This is going to be mostly referred to as a cholesterol. Oftentimes we will take this and attach it to an extra protein, and then it becomes a cholesterol molecule. And then we've got free fatty acids, which would just be the fatty acid all by itself. That's actually what we metabolize for energy. So we don't really talk about that when we're consuming it, but we do talk about it when we're metabolizing it. And so this has been cut from the triglyceride, and this can be used for metabolism. So if you had a triglyceride here and you wanted to create energy and ATP, you would basically just cleave off these individual fatty chains. And now this can go in and become about 32 molecules of ATP through, but going through the Krebs cycle and then becoming, going through the electron transport chain afterwards. And then this can also become a good source of energy, and that can also become a good source of energy. So fat has a lot of energy in it, and that's why it has 9 calories per gram compared with proteins and carbs, which only have 4 calories per gram. So when we're talking about lipoproteins, we are talking that, if we're talking about cholesterols as well, oh shoot, I forgot. There's actually some pictures here. So lipids are what we're talking about. We're talking about fats. You got the diglycerides, you got the triglycerides, you got the monoglycerides. When we're talking about the difference, when you look at a nutrition facts panel, and you look at the fats, you will see how this has got saturated, trans, polyunsaturated, and monounsaturated, 4 categories. All 4 of those are triglycerides. Now, there's going to be some diglycerides usually found in the poly and monos as well. But what we see on the nutrition label, what we're talking about nutritionally, like we're talking about food, those are what we see. We see 4 types of fats. Those are our 4 types of triglycerides. We'll also see cholesterols listed. Cholesterols are going to be our individual fats. Those are our monoglycerides. So we do a little bit of digestion, like I said, in the mouth using our lingual lipase. We do a little bit in the stomach, but it's not great at it with our gastric lipase. But most of our fat is broken down thanks to our bile created by our liver, stored in the gallbladder. And some of it's broken down with our pancreas as well to help finish off any of those fats. So those are the materials that help us break that fat down. Then we've got cholesterols in the form of like lipoproteins. So there's going to be 2 types of cholesterol. You've got your low density lipoproteins, that's the LDL, and you get your high density lipoproteins, that's the HDL. And they look different. If you look at like, if you look at the difference between these cholesterols, yeah, people always draw it like this, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want. There we go. So here's the difference between HDL and LDL. Look at the difference between these. You can see the orange stuff, that's actually like fats and lipids versus like, look at this like big red thing here. Look at all this stuff around the outside. Those are proteins. So high density lipoproteins, HDL cholesterol, is very high in protein and very low in fat. LDL cholesterol, low density lipoproteins, is very high in fat and very low in protein. That's why it's not dense, right? Proteins, in the same way that proteins hardened our pasta earlier, they make this fat molecule harder, which is a good thing because as it's moving through our bloodstream, it's going to scrape the walls and it's going to clean off the walls, right? Whereas the low density stuff oftentimes builds up on our walls and it ends up looking like this, right? The HDL cholesterol kind of gets stuck on the walls there. So LDL cholesterol gets stuck on the walls there. Our HDL is in charge of like cleaning this off, which is why we need to have it. So you can see, actually, this is kind of a better picture actually. There's the HDL, see those proteins? And there's the LDL, those are all the fats. So there's a lot more fat in LDL cholesterol. So think of LDL cholesterol as bad cholesterol. Think of it as lazy density lipoproteins, right? It's lazy, it gets stuck on the blood vessel walls. HDL, it's like intense. And so it's like there to kind of knock that stuff off the walls. So those are our different proteins that we're going to see. And so the way we absorb fats, you can see we get a big old fat droplet and we use some enzymes, we use some bile salts. And what that does is that breaks it into individual fatty acids and then it can enter our bloodstream. There's the lymph, a lot of fat gets carried in lymph and a lot of it gets carried, most of it gets carried in our capillaries, in our blood. So like I said, there are 3 major types of lipids. We're going to see those tomorrow, I believe. You're going to see your saturated fat and you're going to see your unsaturated fat. So the difference there is just chemically they look like this. Like I said, there's a little kink in it. So if you look at saturated versus unsaturated, yeah, so there we go. So you can see a saturated fat's a straight line and an unsaturated fat's got a little kink in it. There is either mono unsaturated, mono means 1, so that means 1 kink. Polyunsaturated means many, so multiple kinks. So polyunsaturated is the really complex fat. And very liquid. That's like the oils you find in like avocados or nuts. And then like fish is really good. So the other thing that you're going to find along with these those particular types of triglycerides is you're going to find those di and monoglycerides as well. Generally, saturated fat has a lot of monoglycerides attached to it. That's why saturated fat sources like animal proteins have a lot of cholesterol in them, right? But then we have our unsaturated fats. Usually we consider like fish and olive oils to be really high in omega-3s and omega-6s. Those are your diglycerides. Those are the double fat molecules that need to make up our cell walls. So this is why it's a good idea to get your omega-3s and your omega-6s in your diet. Everybody should be eating fish in your diet. If you're an animal eater, you should be eating like fish in your diet pretty darn regularly. If you cannot stand fish, there is flax seed oil pills. Flax seed is a type of grain that has a lot of omega-3s in it. But basically the omega-3s that we want to get are called DHA and EPA. We'll talk more about this tomorrow instead, but these are your omega-3 fatty acids. So you can get them from fish oil pills, krill oil pills, and things like that. These are a supplement that I do sometimes recommend if I can't get my client to eat like fat on a regular basis. You can also find foods that have been enriched with DHA and EPA. If you buy this type of milk, for instance, you'll see it has the DHA omega-3 label on it, the little yellow sticker. You'll see that in milk sometimes. You'll see it in eggs sometimes. You can get omega-3s and omega-6s from this type of milk and from this type of eggs. The one that I buy is, this is my favorite brand of milk right here. This one with the yellow label there, because it's got lower sugar and they are adding in those omega-3s. Now, do you need to take an omega-3 supplement? No, not if you got plenty of fish in your diet, but those are probably the best sources. And that's important for, keeping your cholesterol low and making fats and all kinds of good stuff metabolizing in your body. Any questions? Like I said, fats are honestly kind of simpler, you've got the triglycerides is the stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about food, and you got either the saturated stuff or the unsaturated stuff. I didn't talk about trans fats. Trans fats are actually an unsaturated fat. They're like an unsaturated fat. They're like an oil that has become evil. So generally we consider like olive oil and oils to be very good for us. Trans fats are where that becomes untrue. If you superheat an unsaturated fat, if you turn it up to a really high temperature, it starts to straighten out all the proteins. And that's where we get like fried foods. That's where we get our trans fats from. Trans fats are very, 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 very bad for us because they are basically unsaturated fats that our body thinks is going to be good for us that actually are not. And what they do is they actually are attracted to other unsaturated fats because they used to be one, and they destroy those unsaturated fats. So all those omega-3s and omega-6s that I just mentioned are really good for us. They get destroyed by our trans fats. And that is why it's the one thing I tell my clients to literally avoid. You should avoid trans fats as much as you can. I get it. We all love deep fried food. It's delicious. KFC is the best, Popeyes is the best. Shots fired. But it's very, very, very bad for us.
Whoa, KFC, did you just say? No way, Jose.
He said Popeyes.
I
okay,
prefer
Popeyes.
Popeyes.
Okay.
I prefer Popeyes. But if you've ever seen
I heard something really bad about KFC chicken.
what's
Like-
that?
They reuse their chicken. They use the ones from like 2 to 3 days old chicken.
Oh, I heard even worse than that. That you guys don't want to hear, but I'm like, someone find out about like they using dead chicken, like already been dead, and oh, that's disgusting. I know.
I mean, as long as they kill all the bacteria, they're that's the thing. They're deep frying it, so nothing's living, But there's a great like Simpsons episode where Homer's trying to put on a bunch of weight because he's trying to get out of work. And so his doctor tells him, is like, if you want to know if it's, he's like, you need to eat really unhealthy foods in order to do this. And he's like, the best way to do it, he's like, if you're not sure if something's really unhealthy, rub it against a piece of paper. And if it turns clear, if it turns the paper clear, it's unhealthy. And so he like rubs like a piece of fried chicken and like the paper turns clear like glass. So then like later, Homer's like, I'm not sure if this is unhealthy enough. And so He rubs it on the wall. This should be a gift. This should work. Oh, it's just not loading fast enough. Yeah, there we go. So he rubs it on the wall. The wall turns clear. This is like, that's one of my favorite jokes they've ever done. But that's what trans fats do. We call them hydrogenated oils. They are extremely bad for us. So like I get it. I like fried food. It's amazing. Avoid it at all costs. It's very, very, very bad for us. So it's not about the amount of fat and stuff. It's about how that fat is treated. When it's superheated, that's why it's bad. This is why everybody went on like coconut oil. They went on there was like a big coconut oil kick a little while ago, which coconut oil is actually relatively healthy, but it is a saturated fat, which means it does have lots of cholesterol in it. But the thing is, saturated fats, because they're already saturated, you can superheat the crap out of those. And you don't have to worry about it becoming a trans fat. Because it can't get up to, it doesn't have a smoking point. So people were like, look, you're overcooking your food and that's making you absorb trans fats. And it's really unhealthy. You got to stop cooking in oils. What you can do instead is you can cook in coconut oil.
Well, that's why they said avocado oil is good.
Yeah.
Saturated fat.
Yeah, because avocado oil is the highest smoking point, I think, out of all the not coconut oils. Yeah. That is why I cook with I used to cook with avocado oil. I can't cook with avocado oil anymore because my girlfriend's allergic to it. But yeah, it basically just means honestly though, just cook low and slow. Stop overcooking, stop fast frying your food. Cook it nice and slow and you'll be fine, or bake it. All right, next we got proteins. Proteins are the coolest, but they're actually simple to talk about. So this actually moves pretty quick. But proteins are what gives our body structure, right? This collagen that makes up our skin, that's protein, right? So this is going to, be these big complex chains of amino acids. When you look at a protein, it's this big long chain of amino acids. So what we usually do when we're drawing proteins, in order to just make this simple, is we usually just draw proteins like this. We just draw squiggles, and that's a protein, right? This is meant to be kind of a fill in, fill it in about like, wow, it's like, what does this actually look like? It's like, wow, it's going to look like whatever it's supposed to, like collagen. That's not how you spell collagen, it's with an E. No. Collagen looks like this. See, it's like little strands all kind of, intertwined together. Muscle proteins, look at this. You look at actin. Actin looks like this, right? Little strand that kind of looks similar to collagen, actually. Myosin looks like a strand, but it's got little heads on it that look slightly different. You've got tens of thousands of, honestly, millions of proteins inside of your body, all looking slightly different. You look at the pump that I talked about earlier. Remember that pump that was moving stuff from one side of a membrane to the other, right? This right here, this little pump, that's a protein, right? So you are filled to the brim with different types of proteins. There's proteins in your bones. Like when we come across like a skeleton, we're seeing like the calcium phosphate that's left behind, you look at like a skeleton, you see the teeth, you see the dentin that's left behind. But there used to be protein in all of that, when it was still like a living creature. We got proteins everywhere, guys. So we definitely need to have protein be a part of our diet. And basically, think of proteins like Legos, right? You think about like a bunch of different Lego blocks, right? Like if you need to make this pyramid, right? And this is the blueprint. It's got to have, is orange down here in the corner and this green one here, right? Think of each of these as an individual amino acid, right? And if you put all those amino acids together in a very cool sequence, you end up with a specific shape. That specific shape is a protein, right? So we've got all kinds of different looking amino acids. Now, imagine, Legos, there's obviously a bajillion different versions of them. In the amino acid world, there are 20. There's 20 different shapes. And those 20 different shapes are what make up every single protein that you've got. So if you put them in one order, they're kind of like an alphabet. You know, if you assemble all the letters in this order, it's one word. If you assemble the letters in a different order, it's a different word, right? So to look at an amino acid chain, it's going to be all of those amino acids just kind of laid out in this sequence, right? Phenylalanine, leucine, I can't remember what SER is, and cysteine. But those are all of our individual amino acids. So if you eat a protein, let's say this is a chicken breast right now, right? So this is we'll say this is a piece of Popeyes, right? So if you were to take this and then assemble it, like let's say I put it in this order here instead, my digestive system breaks it down and I'm left with nothing but individual amino acids. And then I rearrange it in this order right here. Well, now this chicken breast became a molecule of collagen making up my skin. Or maybe I put it in a slightly different order, right? Maybe I put it in this order. And now it's the protein found in a bone cell, or, maybe I put it in this order here. And now suddenly it's a molecule of DNA, or it's a cell membrane, or it's a protein pump, right? So, or maybe it's amylase, right? Remember we talked about salivary amylase. That's those enzymes. Enzymes are proteins, the salivary amylase, the brush border disaccharides, all of those were proteins, right? So we have an amino acid as this big complex chain. So what gives them its interesting shape is the nitrogen. So when we look at the structure of it, basically what we need to do is we need to go through a process, we call it denature. We need to denature those proteins, which means we need to take this big complicated three-dimensional shape and straighten it out into a line. And once we straighten it out into a line, we can start to chop it up into individual amino acids. How do we denature stuff? Well, we can use chemical acids like your stomach acid. We can use heat. This is actually one of the reasons why we cook our food. Other than the fact that it destroys viruses and bacteria, it also unfolds some of our proteins. That pasta that was like hard and impossible for us to break down earlier, well, we throw it in boiling water and that super high heat unfolds some of those proteins. And now suddenly when it gets into my digestive system, it can break it down very quickly. That's another reason why cooking your food increases its nutritional capacity. One more reason why we don't need to go on a raw diet. The Liver King guy is a weirdo. We've also got proteases and peptidases. These are digestive enzymes that kind of break that stuff down in our digestive system. So heat or enzymes or other conditions are going to take this big complicated shape and kind of straighten it out. And then we can start to, this doesn't actually look, it kind of looks like a straight line here, but what it really looks like is, it looks like this. It's this big long chain of all those amino acids, right? We're straightening it out into the individual separate amino acids. And then we can break them down and it looks like this, right? So this is an amino acid chain, and then that's some amino acids that are in smaller chains, and then eventually they're individual amino acids. And once they're individual amino acids, they are officially small enough to get sucked into our bloodstream. There's our little villi there, and it can get into the body to get transported around, and then our body can build it back up and make all the new proteins that it needs to make. So what we have inside of our liver and inside of just our body in general is our what's called amino acid pool. And it's a collection of amino acids. And that way, like if I need to make new calf muscles, but I don't have any leucine, and I need leucine to be able to make a new protein in my calf, if my calf's like, hey, I got all 19 here, but I'm missing leucine, right? It'll send a signal protein, which will head to the liver, and then the liver will be like, oh, great. And it'll release that leucine into the bloodstream until it finally makes its way to the calf. And then boom, now I can assemble a new protein and I can make new muscle in my calf. And that's what your amino acid pool does. It basically is like it's your spices cupboard. It's your pantry. And so you go to the pantry, get the ingredients that you need, assemble it together, and make your food. So there's the amino acid pool. Like I said, it's going to be in your liver. Some of it's in your kidneys too, and then well, it's not really in your kidneys. If your kidneys basically break down an amino acid in order to break it down for energy, The leftover nitrogen goes through your kidneys to be processed and then gets added to your urea. And then your urea gets added to a little bit of water and it becomes urine, and then you pee it out. Here's protein synthesis. This is how your body assembles those proteins. It does it thanks to the blueprint here. This is your DNA. I'm not going to go into DNA. That's not our area. But that's how our body reassembles those proteins. So then we've got our vitamins and our minerals left, right? So we've talked about our 3 macronutrients. Now we got to look at our vitamins. So vitamins we've got our water soluble vitamins. We've got our fat soluble vitamins. We classify those based on like what they're dissolved in and what they're carried in. So, you know, vitamins are these materials that aid in certain metabolic processes, right? So like vitamin K, for instance, interacts really well with iron and allows our body to make more hemoglobin and proteins like that. So lots of different things that are going to happen thanks to our vitamins there. So water soluble vitamins are the ones that dissolve in water. You can kind of just eat as many of these as you want. If you eat too many vitamins, it can actually become toxic in certain levels. You know, like for instance, like you know, too much sodium, right? It has been shown to reduce your bone density. Now, sodium is a mineral, but like it's an example of what I'm talking about here. Too much vitamin C can cause canker sores. Too much vitamin E. Actually, not sure what happens. What happens? Vitamin E toxicity. It would probably just make your skin really stiff. Yeah, increased risk of cancer actually. So that wouldn't be good. So vitamin E, hypervitaminosis E. Oh, it can cause hemorrhaging. Oh, that's right. So this actually sort of takes it. Vitamin E and vitamin K. That's right. Vitamin E and vitamin K are super attracted to one another. And what's crazy is vitamin K is necessary for your blood to clot. If you eat too much vitamin E, it can pull vitamin K away, and then vitamin K doesn't start doing its job, and then your blood won't clot. And so if you cut yourself, you can bleed out actually. But it's really, really difficult to make that happen. You need massive, massive, massive amounts of these vitamins for this to happen. And it's especially true of water soluble vitamins. Like you'll notice if you look at an energy drink, let's take a look at a Monster energy drink here and look at the nutrition facts panel. You'll notice that a lot of times the amount of B vitamins that they're throwing in there, like B12, it's got 200% per can of your daily recommended amount. So it's like I'm getting twice as much vitamin B12 as I'm supposed to, getting twice as much B6, twice as much B3, twice as much B2. So wouldn't that make me sick? Not really. Water soluble vitamins are, if you have too much of it, your body will basically just pee it out. This is why when you take a multivitamin, your pee turns bright, bright yellow. It's because multivitamins usually have a massive amount of vitamin B2 in them. That's riboflavin. So you're seeing that riboflavin come out in your urine. It does mean that your kidneys had to work a little bit harder, but like not really that much harder. So we're not really worried about overdosing on water soluble vitamins. It can happen, and we'll talk about it on Friday, but like it's fairly rare. Fat soluble vitamins, a little bit more common because we have so much fat running around in our body that we can store it longer. That can become toxic, but also relatively rare. But really the big thing we want to know is that like water soluble vitamins, they get carried around the body in our water. Fat soluble vitamins get carried around in our fats. So what's interesting is that you can become water soluble vitamin, you can become vitamin deficient if you are dehydrated, you know, because like you can get the vitamins in your body, but they don't get absorbed because you don't have enough water coming into your diet. Same thing is true of fat soluble vitamins. Fat soluble, you can be vitamin deficient on like a low fat diet because like your vitamin A just doesn't get into the body. It's like I'm eating a diet that's rich in vitamin A. It's like, yeah, but you're not absorbing any of that vitamin A because there's no fat in your diet. So we do need to make sure that we have fats and water as a part of our diet in order for us to get these vitamins. And these vitamins are very essential for our metabolism. And the same thing is true of minerals. Minerals are inorganic. They're basically rocks and metals that we consume regularly in order to do certain physiologic processes. We talked about sodium and potassium earlier. Sodium and potassium have different levels of charge. They're kind of like different, magnets. And so if you were to flush them back and forth like this, those electrons bounce back and forth, creating electricity. And so we capture that electricity and use it to do all the work that we do. So we need to have sodium and potassium as a regular part of our diet in order to be able to generate that energy. Other materials, you've got calcium that makes up our bones. We've got iron that makes up the hemoglobin in our blood, copper that helps our immune system, zinc that also helps our immune system. All these various different chlorine, right? That's how we make our hydrochloric acid. All of this like very important stuff that allows us to kind of do all of our various physiologic processes that, weirdly enough, are not necessarily part of our body, but they are part of our body. They're not organic, but they are still sort of part of us. So it's the inorganic stuff that is part of us. So those are the 6 essential nutrients in a nutshell. We'll talk about water here at the end, I think. Water's at the very end? No, I forgot. This whole class like just skips over water until one day where it's like, okay, now we're gonna talk about water. Water is, by the way, is how we move all this stuff around. Water is how we're getting some oxygen but mostly like a lot of our hydrogen. And obviously allows us to move materials throughout the body. It's the most common compound in the universe. But talking about metabolism, when we're discussing metabolism from a nutritional standpoint, we are talking about how much energy your body breaks down and generates in a day, right? So when we're talking about energy, right, we're talking about ATP molecules. So your metabolism, a lot of times people think it was just how much energy you burn in a day. And remember, metabolism is all chemical processes. All of that takes energy. So it's the total amount of calories that you're burning per day. Or you can think of it as like the total number of calories that you need to eat in a day to give you that energy to do all that stuff, right? So if metabolism is the total energy required, we're going to break this down in a couple ways for us to understand. We have our basal metabolism. Like if you were just like a living organism that didn't do anything, you don't move, you're just barely surviving, keeping your processes like alive, but you were like totally in a coma, the amount of energy you would burn at its lowest amount, the amount that like keeps you as like a living organism, that is what we refer to as your basal metabolic rate, or your BMR. It's the minimum amount of energy required to sustain you while you are alive. Now you'll sometimes hear the resting metabolic rate, the RMR, as well. This is the minimum at rest. So this is what's kind of interesting. Resting metabolic rate is something that we actually could never genuinely measure, because like all of us have to live a life. You know what I mean? Like you're processing food from yesterday. You know what I mean? Like, so that's burning a little bit of extra energy. So the true resting metabolic rate would be like if I made you fast for like a full week and you're going to survive it, and then like you were also completely unconscious in a coma, in a laying down position, perfectly at rest, that would be the true RMR, right? But we don't really measure things like that. We usually take people to a lab and it's like, we'll do like we call it an RMR test or a BMR test. And it's the amount of calories they're burning, but it's like that calorie is going to be slightly boosted from dinner yesterday. But we try to make it as accurate as possible, which is why a lot of times if you do one of those tests, you will encourage them to fast the night before. You know what I mean? But the base, or we'll just run the numbers mathematically and we assume that they're perfect. And then if they're not perfect, what do we do? We just make an adjustment. We got all the time in the world, right? So we calculate out BMR, we calculate out RMR using math, and then we assume that that math is perfect. And then if the reality is, if I've got Al on a diet and he's not getting the results that he's supposed to be getting, well, I know I did my math wrong. Or, his body is not perfectly formulated to that formula. So I make a small adjustment, and then all of a sudden his results start coming. Perfect. We got there, you know? So that's your RMR. So your RMR, your BMR is the basal amount of energy that you burn every day. So we're basically trying to talk about how we're breaking down food and converting it into ATP. ATP eventually breaks down. You kick off that third phosphate, you're left with ADP. For the record, there is still some energy left in a molecule of ADP. You could kick off the second phosphate and you would get a little bit of energy as well. Your body doesn't try to do that though. ATP is so much more efficient. And then there's even a little bit of energy in AMP. AMP, by the way, it's interesting. If you are in a super low calorie situation, and you still need to produce energy and your body starts breaking down AMP, or you start breaking down ADP and you're left with AMP. AMP has actually been shown to reduce muscle protein synthesis. It's actually been shown to interrupt your ability to build new muscle mass. And that's usually why we see like a lot of marathoners have that kind of emaciated, super, super ultra skinny look. Is because like they're running a marathon, this huge amount of like energy output. So their body has to find a way to keep producing energy. So they end up like breaking ADP down because they need the energy. They've run out of ATP. And then that AMP has actually been shown to be like, oh, well, clearly we burn a ton of energy. We should not make any more protein because that protein's only going to burn even more energy. So that's what they think. That's the theory behind why long duration cardio actually has been shown to sort of interrupt your ability to build muscle mass. At least that's why we think. We're still studying this, but like that's the theory. So we need to be able to make ATP. So where are we going to do it? Well, quick review of like the parts of a cell. We've got our outer membrane, and in that membrane, the cell's body, there's all kinds of fluid we call cytoplasm. We can create some energy in that cytoplasm. If a little bit of sugar goes into that fluid, the little enzymes and bacteriums that are in there are going to break that down and spit out a little bit of energy. But it also makes this other material called lactic acid. So then the cell becomes more acidic. So then, luckily, we've got all kinds of other organelles. We've got our DNA, we've got our nucleus, which houses our DNA, Golgi apparatuses, little lysosomes, given its and centrioles, given the structure and immune system. But the big organelle that we talk about is the mitochondria, right? Mitochondria is going to take that lactic acid in, and then if we absorb a little bit of oxygen into the cell as well, and then oxygen works its way over to the mitochondria, we're able to spit out massive, massive, massive amounts of ATP, right? So if you look at your blood, and then this is your muscle cell, right? Oxygen is going to go in, and you can actually see, here's the input here, proteins, fats, and carbs. Those can all be, your aerobic system can break that all down in the mitochondria. Carbohydrates, though, can be broken down aerobically and anaerobically in the fluid of the cell. And then the phosphagen system doesn't actually require any ingredients other than, I guess creatine could technically be an ingredient, but you make creatine. It's a protein. So phosphagen systems can just kind of generate that passively. But that stuff goes in and ATP comes out, right? But then you also end up with a little bit of lactic acid, right? That lactic acid is going to loop its way back over into the aerobic system. And then you're left with a little bit of like carbon dioxide, a little bit of extra water, all those little byproducts. You're going to put that back into your blood, and then that way it can get to your lungs so that you can exhale it. So our three energy systems, we start with the phosphagen. We don't really make ATP here. We're just like resynthesizing it using creatine. We break it, remake it, break it, remake it. We got the anaerobic system where glucose is going into the fluid, becoming energy. That's our anaerobic pathway. And then we got our aerobic pathway, which is going to happen in the presence of oxygen. That's happening in the mitochondria. So when you look at the complexity, right, our phosphagen system is really simple. It's like creatine, break a molecule of ATP, make a molecule of ATP. Couldn't be simpler. right? That's why it actually makes energy so quickly. We look at the anaerobic system, we look at glycolysis, pretty complicated, but not nearly as, not that complicated. So it's able to spit out energy pretty quickly. Not as fast as the phosphagen system, but it has a greater capacity. It can last about 60 seconds. But then the aerobic system, really complicated, but thanks to being so complicated, it can last a very, very, very long time. So you think about like your capacity to make ATP and how long it's going to last. Your phosphagen system, the ATP-PC system, that is slow. It lasts about 10 seconds. It's not going to last very long. Glycolysis can last a little bit longer, but it's somewhat limited. It only lasts maybe 60 seconds, maybe up to 2 minutes. But then your aerobic system is essentially unlimited. You basically have an unlimited source of aerobic metabolism because we're always going to be able to bring in oxygen, and we have lots of fat that we can metabolize. And that glycogen became lactic acid. We also got that lactic acid. We got an unlimited amount of fuel, pretty much. So during activities, we're mostly talking about being in our aerobic system. All the stuff that you're using right now, for instance, is very aerobic because it's been going for a long time. So you look at your exercise intensity here, sort of an inverse relationship. As the intensity goes up, our duration has to go down, which means we're using glycolysis. If our intensity goes down, then our duration can go up, which means we're using our aerobic metabolism. So when we're talking about all this food, if we put our metabolism's energy together with our consumption of food, we come with two major versions of metabolism. We either have our anabolic pathways. Anabolic, different than anaerobic. Anabolic requires energy, and it basically is how our body builds up and makes new stuff. And then we have our catabolic pathways, how we break stuff down. So you can see here, we've got carbs, fats, and proteins. Catabolic reactions take that carbs and turn it into glucose and turn it into energy. Triglycerides become fatty acids and they become energy. Proteins get broken down into amino acids, which get broken down into glucose, which become energy. Those are all catabolic reactions. The problem is you are also left with extra urea if you do the protein version, so we are trying to avoid that. Anabolic reactions are, let's say you got extra glucose laying around, you take those glucose molecules, put them together, you end up with glycogen. That is an anabolic pathway. I built up glycogen. What if I take a little bit of a fatty acid and I attach 3 of them together? Boom, I've made a triglyceride. Now I've made a new fat molecule, right? Or what if I take 2 amino acids and I put them together? Well, now I've got a protein. I mean, all 20 amino acids, but that is our anabolic reactions. So catabolic reactions break stuff down, anabolic reactions build stuff up. And then the rest of this PowerPoint is just a bunch of pictures of these energy pathways. Here's a molecule of glucose through glycolysis. That's where we get the ATP from. And then there's the enzymes and stuff. There's the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle. And then there's the electron transport chain. Here's glycogenesis, by the way. This is how you actually make glycogen. Glucose attaches to other glucose molecules, kind of goes through this whole process. But we don't have to break those down. There are so many freaking enzymes that I had to have memorized at one point in my life, and I'm like, cool, I've never once used that information. So summarizing everything up, digestion is the process of breaking down stuff catabolically so that we can anabolically build stuff up into our versions of things. I take a Popeye's chicken sandwich, I break it down into glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. I use the amino acids to make new muscle. I made the glucose to make energy. I use the fatty acids to, hopefully some of it'll become some cell membranes, but I also use that to produce energy. Yes, question.
When I did the midterm for 105, I just needed to kind of understand anabolism more because I don't know, I kind of got confused because they were asking like the bonds of a smaller molecule to form a larger molecule. Yes. And I was like, this is kind of confusing because I thought it was high. Yeah.
You're running into a classic problem. It sounds confusing because we're throwing the word molecule around. But
Mhm.
think about just taking something simple and building it up into something complex. The more working parts something has, the more complicated it is, you know, but it doesn't have to be super, super complicated. Like think about this, right? If I take this, right? 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. That is more complicated than that. You know, that's all it is. Like this is a molecule of 4 pieces, and this is a molecule of 2 pieces. So if I took this and added it, let's say I had another one over here, right? And I now put these 2 things together. This simple thing here and this simple thing here added together become a much more complex thing. And that's what we have over here. So I anabolically did it. That's anabolism in a nutshell.
Anabolism. Okay.
So,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
Honestly, another good way to remember this. This is a terrible way to remember this ethically, but it's a really good way to remember things. The real name for steroids, we call them anabolic steroids, which is a really good name because it
I've
takes
heard of that
somebody
before.
very small and makes them very big. So it's kind of a good analogous way to see it in your brain. You shouldn't do it. It's very bad for you, but it is accurate scientifically.
Okay. So that's when you break it up into like the ones like that, they're basically like little units.
Yeah, think of it as like if I take a bunch of sugar molecules, those are the ones, and I put all those sugar molecules together, I took it from being 1 thing to being 4 things. So it's more complicated now. So that's anabolic. But if I took that 4 thing and I broke it down into 4 individual 1 things, that's catabolic.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So
that
whenever
one
I'm talking about,
stumped me.
yeah, it's interesting because it's, you know, but it's once you keep it organized in your brain, they're just total opposites of one another. One goes this way, one goes this way, you know. But digestion is catabolic. You're taking a donut, which is very complicated, and breaking it into sugars, amino acids, and fats, which those are all each simple things.
So what about hydrolysis?
Hydrolysis is how we make catabolic stuff. So how do I split that stuff up? Like what caused me to have this big, long, complicated chain? How did I break the chain apart? I use hydrolysis to do that. So hydrolysis is part of catabolism. Now, if I suck the water out of something and it comes together and forms a solid, I dehydrate something. That's how I synthesize stuff. That's how I get anabolic reactions.
Because that's where it kind of confused me, because like I thought it would have been hydrolysis for the answer, but because I was thinking ideally when the water is being like subtracted from it, I thought it would have been 2 molecules, a small molecule to make a larger molecule.
You're right, but we don't call that hydrolysis. That's dehydration synthesis.
Oh,
I think you just had your terms backwards. Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because we hear the word hydro, we think water. Well, also don't forget dehydrate, right? Dehydration synthesis. Remember when I talked about chyme earlier, that wet soupy stuff? As we pull water out of it, it becomes hard, and that's your stool, that's your poops, right? Like that's we suck the water out of it so that it goes and it becomes a solid. Otherwise, things would be a lot less pleasant. But yeah, so dehydration synthesis is how we anabolically make stuff. Hydrolysis is how we break stuff down. Another way to remember that too, Amber, is anytime you hear the word lysis at the end of a word, that means to break down. So like, you know, the cool sculpting.
Well, because that's why I got confused when they asked about the bonds of a smaller molecule to form a larger molecule. I thought that was like, well, it's actually the opposite of it, but yeah, okay, never mind.
Yeah, you got it flipped.
Yeah.
For the record, that's the best way to be wrong. That's the best way to be wrong. If you're gonna be wrong, always be wrong in the opposite, because you know it just means that all you have to do is flip the concept around. You know.
Okay.
Means you understand the
Yeah.
concept, you just have your definitions backwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
That helps.
Yeah. So fat, carbs, and proteins all get absorbed in the small intestine. Once they get in there, we can build them up. Vitamins and minerals, they mostly get absorbed in the large intestine, although some of the fat soluble ones obviously are coming in at the small intestine. And then once we've got all that, we can produce energy through our various metabolic pathways that I have talked to death about, so I will not go over one more last time. And for the record, you can also metabolize fat. You do just have to oxidize that fat first through beta oxidation is what we call that. It was a long one today, guys, but I appreciate all of you guys sticking with me. Any final questions before I let you all go?
Oh, thank you.
All righty.
What's the difference between animal and plant proteins?
Yes. So an animal protein is guaranteed to have all 20 of those amino acids. Plant proteins are going to have, they'll have all 20, but some of the levels are so low that they're basically immeasurable. So we'll just say they don't exist. So like rice might be missing leucine, right? So if you need all 20 amino acids in order to make proteins in your body, you need to make sure that you're eating a very large blend of different plant-based proteins in order to ensure that you are getting adequate protein or adequate amino acids in your diet. Animal proteins, because an animal's body assembled them, we know that it has all 20, right? Like your proteins, like you have all, your collagen, your actin, your myosin, your DNA. We know that all of those proteins found in you are made up of all 20 amino acids. So if somebody were to eat an animal protein, they instantly know they're getting all of them. Whereas plant proteins, you could be missing 1 or 2 amino acids. So that's the difference.
That's why vegetarians and vegans are always hungry, huh?
Well, if they don't do it right. I'm not vegetarian, I'm not vegan, but as somebody who I try not, the whole rumor that like vegans don't get enough protein is it's honestly a myth, but vegans who don't understand how to be a good vegan, yeah, that actually can be really unhealthy for you. Like if you're consisting on a diet of like pasta with a side of like Oreos, that's a vegan diet. But those are both coming from, grains, they're both coming from wheat, like Oreos are just flour,
Lard.
so you're not getting a complex. So what you need to do is you need to have that pasta with some beans on it. Now you're complementing your proteins, and you're ensuring that you're getting a full amino acid profile. So that's why.
Interesting. I tried that vegetarian and I was starving like all the time.
Were you?
Yes, I
That's
never felt like.
See, now hunger is kind of a different process than just metabolism. So I'd be curious to know. I'd be curious to know why. Did you have a lot of fat in your diet? Did you get like olive oil and stuff?
Well, yeah, I actually, that the whole, coconut oil boom. I was part of that. That was this whole little vegetarian thing, and like that didn't last very long. Like I said, I was starving all the time. I felt like I was always, especially playing basketball and sports and stuff. I was always hungry. I'm but different hungry. Like I feel like I didn't eat today. It was.
Protein has been shown to be the most, we call it satiating. That will be Monday's lesson, by the way. Satiation is learning how to control your hunger. If you are satiated, you're not hungry. And protein has the highest satiation factor, but it's not different between animal or regular protein. It just means that you're probably just getting really low protein sources. You're probably just getting low protein plant-based sources. Like if you're not eating like a lot of soy, you're going to be in trouble,
So that's interesting because I heard that we're supposed to stay awake. Well, of course, too much of anything will kill you, moderation. But, soy is like I don't know. I've heard
It
so
raises
many
your
different
estrogen
things.
levels. Is that what you've heard?
Yeah, it raises your estrogen levels.
Yeah.
It's synthetic. Like it's just like I
So-
mean I
so-
don't.
So soy does have what are called phytoestrogens. They're very small estrogens. But so you hear that and instantly your brain goes, oh, well, that must mean that it would raise my estrogen levels, right? Makes sense. It's the same word, you know? The reality is phytoestrogens are so small. You would need to drink like 4 gallons of soy milk a day, every day, in order to like actually boost your estrogen levels. It'd be very difficult. So yeah, that's kind of a rumor. That's a myth. We'll talk about that. We will actually get into that a little bit because we're gonna do phytochemicals on Friday.
Cool. This is my most interesting part. I love nutrition.
That I will definitely address that. Keep that question and bring it back up on Friday, and we'll talk about, or maybe it's Monday, but we'll talk about it for sure. Because I'd love to dispel that myth. I think soy can actually be very healthy for you. We got 2 questions. Let's go Marjan first, and then we'll do Amber second. What you got, Marjan?
Okay. Question is, how come some people, they can be like not eating for the whole day, like not even get hungry? Like every time when you ask them like you're hungry, they said no. So what is the reason for it? Like, is it something healthy-ish?
I wouldn't say that is either inherently healthy or unhealthy. That's a tough question to answer. There is probably, that is where the physiologic differences of one human to the next, I would say probably best answers that, you know. They probably just have, you know, they don't create as much what's called a ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hormone that we make that triggers our hunger. They probably just have really low ghrelin levels, I would assume.
So is there any way that we can control the
there are like,
the
there's
body?
medications and stuff, but there's you know, we know that like protein produces ghrelin, that's why it helps us feel fuller longer. But if you have somebody that you know that's like that, I would recommend finding ways to, like, foods that they're going to enjoy much more is going to help them like want to consume food more often. This is what happens with kids. You know, we're always worried about like parents can't get their kids to eat. So finding ways to make food taste good is a big part of that. Finding ways to give it a texture that kids enjoy. And then like shakes, you know, and things like that.
Okay.
Be a really good way to get things in. Like me, when I like was more into like muscle building and bodybuilding at younger, when I was like younger in my early 20s, I had a really hard time eating enough. I have a really like low hunger level. Like I eat like a baby bird, you know? And so I just like don't get hungry. And so like by the end of the day, I'd be like, I need like another 1,000 calories and it's 10 o'clock at night, you know? And I was like, ugh. And so I get really stressed out about it. And so I would like basically just make like a smoothie and try to like, and throw like a freaking half a jar of peanut butter in there, you know, and just try to get my calories in. So that is our nutrition consultation lecture. We'll cover that. That's going to be on Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
we'll talk about some of the tips and tricks for weight gain versus weight loss. Tricks for how to make you feel fuller longer for people who are on a diet, on a restricted diet, and then tricks for how to get in extra calories for people who are on like a low, you know, who need more calories.
Okay. All right.
Good question.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
a fun.
thank
That's a fun talk. But if I go any further into it, we'll be here for like 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but we'll definitely cover that as well.
All right. Thanks.
Amber, you had a question?
A statement question, I guess, and a question. They mentioned that the reason why a lot of people who have fibroids, they can't take in as much estrogen, and the soy that has, you know, well, the soy has that, and so that's why I had to stay away, because I'm like, okay, they told me I had to look at everything that I buy, look on the back of it, because if I keep eating it, like, say for example, I get something for breakfast that has a lot of soy in it, and then something for lunch, and then dinner, and it's just accumulating, and it has troubles.
So there's kind of an interesting thing. So this, you guys want to hear something that's really fascinating? Bring this back up. I should call Mo and have him come in and talk about this. This is really fascinating.
You should call
Mo went to Virginia Tech, right? I think. He went to some school in Virginia. I think it was Virginia. He'd be so mad if I get it wrong. But his school was actually a really interesting basis for this like new water filtration system. And so they put in this really advanced water filter system for all the drinking fountains in this university. And even with that really advanced system, here's something that they are starting to notice in our drinking water in the world in general. So Amber, in the last 20, 30 years, we have seen a major uptake in fibroids and estrogen problems in women. I don't know if you guys, anybody know who Alex Jones is? He is a conspiracy theorist idiot that
I've heard of that name.
What's that?
I've heard of his name.
I hate him. I'm not supposed to talk about politics, but I absolutely hate that guy. He's the guy who got sued recently because he was talking about how the Sandy Hook victims were faking it. Monstrous human being.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
But there's a very funny meme of him online where, you know, he had his little radio conspiracy theorist show, and he's like, they're turning the frogs gay. And what he meant when he says that is that frogs actually, if you guys remember Jurassic Park, they can switch sexes. They can change. If there's not a female in the group, they can switch, or if there's not a male, they can switch. But what they were finding is that frog colonies were dying off. And they were like, what the heck's going on? And it was because they were all turning female, the whole colony. And so they couldn't change back to a male. So the reason why they were like, what's going on? And they looked at their water source and they found massively high estrogen levels. And this is our drinking water, right? So we started to know, it's like, and this is true in the US everywhere. Our estrogen levels in our water are creeping up every single year. And they were trying to figure out why. And here's what's crazy. Here's the working prevalent theory. They think that it's not so much the estrogen found in our foods and stuff. They think that it's actually from birth control. So birth control is like certain levels of estrogen, and that gets peed out. And then that gets into our water. And our filtration system kills all the bacteria and viruses found in our urine and stuff, right? But we're recycling our water every single day. But phytoestrogens are so small that the filter doesn't kill it. So Virginia Tech, who had this extremely highly advanced filter, they checked the water levels there, and they still found that the estrogen levels were really high, even with one of the most advanced filtration systems to date in the world. So here's the thing though, like, and I'm not saying don't use birth control, but I am saying like we've been using like this version of birth control for decades. And like they are now starting to invent male birth control, which is non-hormonal and does not affect things. And they can't freaking get funding for it because they're like, why? We have this one that works. And it's like, like as a scientist, I'm like, God! It drives me insane to hear that argument. Like, why make the new thing if we've got this one that works? I'm like, it doesn't work. I mean, it works to do the one thing, but it's killing us. Anyway, I could talk about this for like 2 hours. I could literally do a TED talk on this because I'm fascinated by it. But I think, you know what, birth control is a super helpful tool for some women. Like it really makes their life, you know, I am pro birth control. I really am. But if we get a better version, like invent that, fund that crap, you know? Anyway, I'm on a rant.
They're scared to invent something new because it's going to take over the old stuff.
God.
And they're probably making profit from the way this one's going,
Also,
even though the other one is not really making, you know, they're making enough money. He's like getting hot about it.
I'm literally getting sweaty.
You see how Roe versus Wade went? For sure.
Oh, I can't talk about that. We're not allowed to talk about that. I can't.
Oh, the jacket's off.
I will super get fired. You cannot talk about politics. I'm barred. I mean, you guys can talk about it, but I'm not allowed to. not allowed to weigh in on stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right.
So, but it isn't true about like the things I eat that has the soy in it. That's
it would have
more estrogen,
it would
like
have
proteins
some effect.
and.
You're basically trying. Here's the thing: avoiding those foods is going to help a little, but again, in the same way that, like I said, it would take 4 gallons of soy milk a day to affect a man's estrogen levels.
Imagine it over the years.
Imagine, yeah. I mean, if you're cutting it out of your diet, it might have some positive effect, but in the same way that it would take 4 gallons, you know, you're not getting that much in your diet. So like, is it really going to help cutting it out? Maybe. You're doing the best you can, but it's not, you know.
But over like 4 to 5 years of consuming,
maybe
even though it may accumulate up to 4 gallons, you know.
But, but no, I'm talking about every day. That's the thing. These levels are so small. You know what I mean?
Well, they say it's in like, you have to stay away from yeast if you have fibroids too. You have to stay away from like
that's
estrogen
thing.
And
that's actually just because of the bacteria though. That's slightly
okay.
And that,
but I get you though.
Definitely listen to your doctor on that.
But okay.
All right.
That was already off topic. Thanks.
Yeah, a little bit, but it was fun.